The day of the Cold Springs fire, the wind was blowing severely that day. I know that it was moving trees rapidly, and so when the fire started, there was no way to contain it. Everybody was in emergency mode trying to preserve or save. Where the fire initially started at, there was a residence right there by the road. And so the members there had to determine to save or try to save their house, or try to run down and warn other people that the fire was moving. By the time that they got the fire crews even coordinated to move out there, the fire had already moved over miles, and it was headed over a mountainous area. The terrain was so remote that there's sporadic housing, and so there was no way for them to pull an emergency team together to go out and warn individuals. And as it rapidly moved and the night came down on it, you could see the fire, but you couldn't identify where there was roads to residence because of the darkness.
When we look back, I started seeing some smoke coming, more than usual, some black smoke, and I thought maybe a building that caught fire, but maybe not the actual mill itself, the other building. And next thing you know, everyone was outside when we got to North 40, and the whole structure was up in flames.
I think that it was just surprising how fast it went. I've lived in the same residence for over 25 years. I've had 4 fires go around my house. I was a victim of the Cold Springs, but we've never not had advance warning because of the speed of the wind that was happening then. I think that when it hit, it started and crossed, over 40 miles in one night over terrain, going zigzagging back and forth into different areas. And then the wind would shift and move in a different direction. So just trying to contain it, let alone trying to warn the residents. If we look at the terrain here, we try to preserve life and limb first, but when we're trying to do that at the same time, we're so sporadic in our housing in the timbered areas that it's really hard to know exactly where the residents are. They're not really clearly marked or defined. They are at the road, but as the roads go up into the mountains, it's harder to catch them. I think every year we deal with climate change. Last year was no exception. Even last week, if you didn't tell from here, there's snow today, but last week there was nothing on the ground. There was no moisture. The rain had melted all our snow away, and so we were looking at a possible another high impact season. With the Cold Springs fire going for days and no power, it was really hard to communicate for our fire crews and the residential people. The power went out the second day to almost all residents, and it was out for weeks. I want to say we burnt over 80 homes between the 2 fires that we had moved through our communities. I lost both ancestral homes of mine. One that was up on Cameron Lake Loop, and then the one down on Highway 97 was my grandmother's. The one on Cameron Lake was my grandfather's grandparents. So we lost both of them, and the impact to all the families that are still trying to recover is just tremendous. But also the outpouring of support in outside communities really helps, but it doesn't put their lives back together. We just seen some elders who lost both their homes. They were siblings, and they're both in their late 70s, and both of them were homeless in one day. So the impacts here were severe, all the way down to the youth. A lot of people struggling. We're in a poverty area. We don't have high employment, and the ones who do, barely scrape by just to live on what they have. And if it was paid for, they could afford, their utilities and stuff. So these fires are just devastating.
Behind me is our old Fish and Wildlife building. This fire was burned last year during the last fire season, was called the Greenhouse Fire, and it actually started up towards the Columbia, burned its way up and over the hill. You can't see right now, but over the hill, and burned this direction, and then caught these facilities on fire. It used to be our old forestry building where my dad worked, and then I worked. Behind it is a recycling center that also burned. Just to get an idea, this is where we used to park right out in the front of the building. Now it's no longer here.
This last fire season mainly came up out of grassland areas and covered vast amount of land in a short amount of time. The 2015 and 2017 fires all came across through residential areas and went into timbered areas and just took out our forests. I mean, it devastated our natural resources. I don't know how many decades it will take to recover. And this one here, it went through so many different areas. It took out a lot of wildlife, and that's one thing that nobody talks about is, you know, the land that was scarred and burned and the residents that were lost. But when you drive through, we live in cattlemen's country and farm area and wildlife area. When they were going through perusing the areas after the burn, they found so many skeletal remains, burned animals, injured animals. It was heart-sickening, you know, to witness that and the livelihoods that it impacted.
As far as from a fishery standpoint, you start getting into water quality issues, and that's a big thing with fires and erosion. You know, there's no roots or vegetation to hold anything back when you get the spring rains or the snow melt from the spring. That washes out a lot of roads, culverts, sediment transport into the bigger water bodies. So it's not only an issue with the soil, but where that soil goes after. On extreme fires like the Cold Springs in particular, with how hot it burned and some of the soil that, conditions afterwards, it's going to take a long time to get it back to a more natural state. Historically, fires burned, or lightning strike happened and they let them burn, and that kept a lot of the fuels down naturally, and you had more park-like forest ecosystems where they talk about a lot of our historical records of people being able to ride horse all the way through the woods everywhere. When I was a kid, a big fire was 5,000 acres. Now these mega fires are over 200,000, 300,000 acres just burned in one fire, and so they've definitely changed. Something's changed. I know, like, just speaking for myself, and I'm only 33, but I've seen the change. There's a lot of concerns with the future in wildfire here on the Colville Reservation. It seems like in the past 10 years or so, the fires have got a lot more extreme behavior. I think since 2015, we've lost over 500,000 acres just here on the reservation alone. And a lot of those are due to human-caused fires, 90% of them. You get your occasional lightning strike that, but typically it seems most are human-caused, whether that's people actually lighting them off or power lines or some infrastructure, human infrastructure. With climate change, I think that's just increased the number of fires we're getting and the behavior of them. It seems like we're getting a lot more less snow in the winter, which is increasing how dry it is, and when it comes summertime, and you still get a lot of those fuels built up from your spring rains and stuff, and then it just seems like the more fuels are out there and the longer fire seasons we have, that their fires are burning longer and hotter. And I think one of the big successes is all the interagency work that's been done with the DNR, and working as one. I mean, these fires affect all of us, whether it's on tribal or fee ground, so working together so we can stop them and get a better handle on them, I should say.